smoking out of a bong, and then the other where later that evening he's on stage. He had an amazing presence, as far as being a bass player goes.
I know that Tad and Kurt were kind of always the core of the band, and those guys seemed closer than anybody else.
He's funny as shit and very well read, highly educated, and great songwriter.
He was getting an English degree, and he was very focused on becoming a poet. So, he used to kind of hang out at this is kind of before espresso blew up really huge. This coffee shop called the Allegro, drinking espresso, hanging out with a bunch of beatnik types. He wore like a beret on occasion. Like Kurt Danielson went from this guy who was like sipping espresso, going to poetry readings, very nice, wearing a beret, to this guy who made this T-shirt hand-scrawled in giant letters, "Stinky Pussy Stinks."
"Stinky Pussy Stinks" on it. And it's like, dude, you are as politically incorrect as any human being I have ever met.
It was like he just tossed his Baudelaire and Rilke books out the window and said, fuck it.
If somebody in 1989 said, yeah, I know Kurt, I'm buddies with Kurt, it was Kurt Danielson, not Kurt Cobain.
Are you ready?
Kurt Danielson was a very popular musician, a friendly guy, had been in a number of bands, very talented musician, had a great amount of respect. And when people said, Kurt's got a new band, they were talking about Danielson and not Cobain.
That was the best and most effective sonic representation of the way that the Tad band actually sounded live. And I think Steve Albini just completely understood the band.
We were tired when we came back. We put a lot into it. We poured ourselves into it. And, we did this EP, I think 7 songs in 3 days, recording and mixing.
It was like the recording of an accident, of a car accident. Nothing rehearsed. It was just a collision, and it was on tape.
When we got, the rough mixes of that, this is back in the age of cassette tapes. I wore that tape down in like 2 weeks. I listened to it over and over and over and over again.
Well, the name of my Kurt Cobain biography, Heavier Than Heaven, comes from a line that I liked that I discovered was what English journalists had nicknamed the tour of Tad and Nirvana that went through England early in their careers. They called it the Heavier Than Heaven tour. And that name came both from the fact that the sound of the bands was very, very heavy. It came from Tad's girth. This was a heavy band. And it also came from the sort of ethereal sound that some of, I think, Kurt Cobain's songwriting was already starting to approach. That tour with Tad was the tour. These were the neutron bomb bands of Seattle.
It was good because we'd seen these guys play and they became good friends here on stateside, and then we're going over to Europe together on a co-headlining tour.
As a band, you get to know your fellow band members, and if you go out with another band, then you get to know them just as if they were in your band too, especially since we were sharing the same van.
Both bands were in this Euro van, and they have the tall, luggage area.
We had all our T-shirts, all our gear, all of us, plus our sound man, plus our driver, all crammed in the same Fiat van, the same standard Fiat van everybody tours in.
You know, I'm a big guy, and Novoselic is a tall guy, and I remember seeing him all hunched up like in a seat like this, wherever, because they're small seats, you know.
So we were all just crammed in this van. There wasn't really any room to even move.
The stories that people told me, it was literally like the joking, they say, a Chinese fire drill. If somebody had to go to the bathroom, they had to unpack all the gear.
Maybe I might have had the best luck being the smallest of everybody there.
It was quite an experience. It was a lot of work.
We were young and naive, and we didn't care that we wanted to work our asses off. We wanted to sacrifice ourselves for the music we believed in, and this was a chance to do it.
And I remember playing in the UK with Nirvana, and it's just complete mayhem. Kids dropping down from the rafters, one after the other, just floating off the stages, just like constantly. Just didn't know what to make of it at the time. Like, wow, this is pretty bizarre.
Because we have hindsight, you know, Nirvana went and became huge. Everyone thinks that tour and many of those early shows, that all anyone talked about was Nirvana, and that's not true at all. Tad got just as much ink and attention as Nirvana did, you know, on that tour. They were truly co-headliners. It wasn't that Nirvana was even bigger than Tad.
There was one person that you could pull out and go, okay, we wanted to do a photo shoot with this guy because he embodies this kind of Northwest Americana. I think the British audience was getting really fed up with the lightness of a lot of the indie British pop that was coming out.
What was really fun is, you know, we were switching off night after night. There, you know, one night Tad would headline, and then the next night we would, and then they'd just go back and forth.
I remember Nirvana took us about a week or so, a couple weeks into the tour to finally kind of find our groove and start playing well, like just making the transition. It took a while, like, to get up to speed, but then we started playing well. And see, we would open for Tad in the UK because Tad were in the music newspapers, and so we were like the opening act. And
we had lots of great conversations. We became brothers.
I remember, you know, Kurt telling me the stories of that tour, and he lit up like you never saw him lit up. He described so wonderfully when Tad also was vomiting a lot, and Cobain became just fascinated with it.
Kurt would always light up during that time, and like get up from laying down, you know, laying down backstage, and he'd hold the bucket for me and laugh.
He enjoyed it more than anybody else did. Certainly, I think more than Tad did.
We'd rate it, you know, like, how was that one? Well, I'd say, you know, on chunk-wise, it was a 7, and he says, you got tears coming out of your eyes. I'd say that's a good one for velocity. And
Kurt had a great amount of respect for Tad and for everybody in that band. Tad, as I write in Heavier Than Heaven, in some ways became Kurt's muse for a couple of months. He wrote, you know, a couple of songs about Tad, or at least about the weird bodily fluids.
They rejected Wood Goblins because, according to them, it was too ugly. Which was, we kind of thought, kind of cool. Being too ugly for MTV during the era of Cherry Pie and Skid Row and shit like that. I don't know, it's kind of cool. They aired a later video claiming claiming that they had